There's your lovely Zoom voice. Hello, everyone. I'm Donna Boyer. Welcome to the April edition of 100 Pictures of Honey. Happy National Poetry Month. Happy Almost Earth Day. And I know you're going to have a wonderful time tonight hearing some beautiful poems that will honor both of those special month, that special month and that special upcoming day. I'm so excited tonight to host these three poets who give voice to the voiceless, whether that's people who are voiceless or the environment and the landscape, voice to the landscape, voices to things that are the kind of the unnameable things, both in us and around us. I really love the work of all three of these writers. As we go through the evening, please keep yourself on mute if you are not a reader, but feel free to use the chat to put reactions, lines you love, little emojis. If you're on camera, wonderful. Hello, it's great to see you. And you can use, you can throw your arms up in excitement or whatever you would like to do on camera to show people that you're enjoying yourself. But please stay on mute to respect the readers. Everyone tonight will have 15 minutes to read. So we'll get to hear a nice selection of their work. And we are going to go ahead and get started with Dr. Tara Betts. I first met Tara when I saw her read from her book, Break the Habit, at a local reading here in the Chicago area. And I have been a fan ever since. And actually really awed by watching her academically, artistically, and joyfully bring literature to every corner of the city. It's really something to behold. And it's really nice that I think, with her latest book, Refuse to Disappear, starting to get a little bit, more in the public eye, which is, something that she very much deserves. I have her official bio, which is very impressive, in the chat. And also I'm going to place the link to her latest book, Refuse to Disappear, in the chat as well. And without further ado, I'm going to share a little bit of one of her poems that I think she's going to read later. And you'll see the kind of heart that she has. This is from her poem called Think Think, which is on the Poetry Foundation website, if you want to look for it later. A human can find more than one path, I hope. Think about how every day someone is hoping for some simple thing, like fresh bread, lightly toasted, the ability to walk without pain, a chance to shower, a moment free of fist and jeer, a moment singing victorious, as if we could level the wrongs and leave the world upright. Everyone, Tara Betts.
Thank you for that really generous introduction, Donna. For a long time, I wondered if anybody noticed what I'm doing, and it feels really good to know people see you, right? So hopefully I can read some poems that kind of reflect that, and hopefully my allergies won't kick in and make me cough a little bit during my time. There it is. Anyway, I think I'm going to do this reading without glasses, which I normally don't do. I need to update my prescription a little bit. I'm going to start with a poem I don't read all the time, and see where that goes. And it's kind of in the vein of some of the poems I had in Break the Habit, but it made it into Refuse to Disappear. It's called The Long Lean. I used to have people that I called after midnight, a sway of voice into voice, steady breath trekking deep into the night. I pray for sleep until daylight, dispel dark solitude and hear traces of waking life as absence ebbs in the sun. I deserve a cradle into closed lids with the deep rise and fall of chest into dawn. the occasional clutch out of nightmares that jar more than any horror movie. In a space where unrolled tapestries might drift me into sleep, I break sharp corners of dreams, watch chunks crumble into ether within the cosmos of skull. People who love you send cards, text, call during the day. I avoid staring into computer screen, bent on insomnia. My job is sleep, making it through the long lean of the night. And kind of jumping around. I realized when I was working on Refuse to Disappear that I wrote like this little cluster of poems about the environment that I really wanted to have out in the world. Um, and it's really interesting to see how much people are talking about climate change now, how much people are talking about the environment when that used to be kind of like a corny liberal issue, right? And now people are realizing, oh, it's important. I'm like, it's always been important, you know. Humans are in conversation with the planet all the time. So I was thinking about this book called An Uncertain Peril, where we talked about, where the book itself talks about the importance of biodiversity and heirloom seeds. And the poem kind of came out of that. It's a very short piece, The Simple Price of Seeds. Seeds are one currency that remains unspent until they root in pockets of soil, split hard hulls, and offer exchanges of what fills the stomachs without labs or stocks exacted. This trade of seeds is a bartering of coins that could save us from our own small preferences. Seeds host lost possibilities, found plants, the cure, and the balm. The next poem is right after it, and it's dedicated to Wangari Maathai. If you haven't heard of her, there's wonderful documentaries about her. She did a memoir. I think it's called Unrooted, or I might be off, but definitely check it out. Taking Root for Wangari Maathai. In the valleys and forests of Kenya, she stood, stalwart as a tree. She knew what trees could give. She remembered the land with fig trees untouched. She recalled beads of frogs' eggs glistening on the banks of rivers, water clear and bubbling, before the crops of tea cut down broad trunks like mere stubble on a man's face. Do not assume the rudimentary rise of branches only mirrors the roots adumbrating into routes underground. The unthinking forget the concert between soil held in place, shade that protects the living, who remember the dead, water gurgling to the air that bubbles and lifts leaves and blades of grass. The trees boom a chorus of quiet drums. When her people saw the rivers dwindle to trickle and topsoil was swept away and even tea failed to thrive, the dazed wonder of malnutrition pointed its gaze at adopting crops like customs that never matched the sustenance that grew, as it should, before strangers insisted, this is the way. We need not see every layer to know what we might see. She knew that losing the trees was way more than the trees in parks and public forests, those lungs breathing in Kenya and the Congo. So when bulldozers came and pangas were brandished, she planted seedlings and taught women to plant trees like the crops they already knew. They stopped demolitions and men more interested in pockets than breath. When the planting of trees and protesting occurs, a common movement occurs, act of taking root. The last movement of the book, I found myself, now this book was done probably like 2 or 3 years before the pandemic. and it didn't come out till last year. But the last section is called "A Wall Is Just a Wall." So if you're familiar with Asada Shakur's biography, um, she has a poem in the beginning where she says, "A wall is just a wall, it can be broken down." And I kind of wanted to give a little nod to her. Um, and a lot of the poems in this section ended up dealing with like police brutality, protests, and stuff that was about prisons. So I'm going to read a couple poems from that. I'm going to try to watch the time, even though I'm blind and it looks a little blurry. So I'll go from there. Short poem. When Dylan woke to George Jackson's death. Sometimes I think this whole world is one big prison yard. Some of us are prisoners, the rest of us are guards. Bob Dylan. That August 1971 morning, Dylan could have been rattled alive and shaken with everything the Panthers could have told him. And Angela Davis's bold, soft-spoken tenets raking across his grief when he lifted his pen and pressed letters into words on paper. Some blues fell out of his grief to say, "Lord, Lord," because the prison guards shot Jackson to death, bleeding and without a single weapon. The ballad closed on every verse that a life sentence is not equal to $70 stolen, much less his life, that George never lived on his knees. So Dylan echoed what the Black folks knew: he would not bow. Um, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the photographer Tanika Johnson. I've known her since she was in high school, and she has this really amazing project called Unfolded Maps or Folded Maps, where she took photographs of houses on the south side of Chicago, then found the corresponding number on the north side of Chicago and took pictures of both houses to show you the disparities between the houses on both sides of the city. And because we've known each other so long, we've always wanted to collaborate. We ended up doing this project with WBEZ, and we were both kind of conflicted about it because they wanted us to write about, listen to a police scanner all day and go to the site of a shooting. And they only wanted us to go to a site of a shooting on the south side. And we were like, people get shot on the north side. They get shot all over in American cities. So thankfully, the one we went to, no one died. But it was really sad because they were all like 11, 12 years old, all the kids who were there. And this was like a kid who was a little bit older who got shot over a misunderstanding by somebody on social media. But this is the poem. A bitter split silence. Gathered behind yellow tape, police stand much taller than children who typically bend limbs to race each other, shoot basketball. The vacant lot where girls ran footballs with boys. Tonight is not that routine. Officers guard the Corton Street and the neighboring lot, thick grass fresh and still growing. Two tried to get the children to talk. Their faint shudders dodge questions that guarantee no safety. Tonight, a young man in a foot race days ago failed to outpace the stone burrowing into his arm, but he lives. Miss Adams does not stutter. She points out overgrown lots where houses stood. No child is more special than another. Her nephew, Christopher Latin, lost at Stroger, the same hospital where a lean sprinter heals tonight. Again, the shooters go free, yet these children waver. Quiet floods July sky that got dark so quick, but not before an ice cream truck inched toward the block, its sugary tinkling song hushed, then turned away. Kids who ran to it for frozen joys are gone. Funerals stay unplanned tonight. No one memorializes childhood or resistant grass that bears witness. A bitter split silence falls where houses used to breathe, while police look for fallen casings. I'm gonna, how are we on time, Donna?
You've got about 4 or 5 minutes left.
Okay, so I'll read a poem about a pit bull and then I'll do the last poem. Um, the building where I'm at now in this particular setting, I used to have an upstairs neighbor who had a pit bull and he was the friendliest dog ever, which we all know people don't always think they're friendly. So this is for him wherever he is now. Priest the pit bull. Priest the pit bull greeted me the first day he moved into my building, his tan fur shining as he wiggled. At least 3/4 of his body wagged when I patted his head and stroked his sinewed back. His mouth, open and panting, made up at least half his face, full of teeth, but gently smiling. I called his name, shouted to him and the other neighbors when I heard his ticking claws on hallway tiles. I'd laugh about Ron O'Neal in playing his namesake in Superfly. He'd quietly trot over and let me pet him. He never needed a leash. Nothing felt like fear gnashing its teeth into the back of my hand. I make it a habit to return kindness to other living beings, even when the world marks them as dangerous. And I'm going to close with a poem that didn't make it into the book because I wrote it a little bit later. And Donna mentioned it earlier. So I wanted to give you guys the full breadth of it because she got a little piece of it that's towards the end of the poem. But I was thinking about all these different political issues and how all these things are happening at once. And then for some reason, I thought of Aretha Franklin. So it came up here. Think, think. Think about the air invisible as it uncurls a wave of toxins. Think about how its fingertips trace the skin as a baton falls on the flesh merely seconds later. Think about how heavy metals brown the water and we are told to drink. Think about how many of us wonder when the roofs over our heads will be tongues evicted from the languages of home. Think about how every person needs a doctor, but everyone doesn't get one. Think about how savings mean nothing to the crazy fine print circumscribed like obsolete glyphs. Think how law books fall open and hopscotch for anyone who keeps writing checks. Think, think, think. Like Aretha Franklin belting "What You Trying to Do to Me." Think how the law keeps shuffling the numbers to fit some constant where acknowledging who is human is posited in some philosophy or some mathematical equation that pretends that logic is its function. When blood needs to find something superior, something that denies how human is defined by a much wider net cast by some divine fisherman or perhaps an African goddess in a gown laced with sea foam. But place markers for faith are constantly moved toward a crucifix. A human can find more than one path, I hope. Think about how every day someone is hoping for some simple thing, like fresh bread lightly toasted, the ability to walk without pain, a chance to shower, a moment free of fist and jeer, a moment singing victorious as if we could level the wrongs and leave the world upright, like a gospel drenched woman singing freedom, freedom after forgiveness, after you change your mind, because you need to think and act to be free.
Oh, thank you so much, Tara. I knew I wanted to hear you read that poem. I've been reading it since it came out. And hearing you read it was amazing, as I knew it would be. Thank you so much for sharing those poems. And it's so nice to note there's going to be such an affinity between some of your work, especially about the earth, and some of Jared's and Michael's. So I think it's going to be a a great way to connect all of you and your work. So we're going to continue with our next reader, who is Jared Beloff. I first met Jared, well, on Twitter, like, you meet a lot of writers, but at a Teachers Who Write reading a couple of years ago that we organized. And I've been really enjoying getting to know him better, his generous spirit, his dedication to the environment and spirituality in his work, in poems that kind of try to reconcile both the beauty and the difficulty of being a person, a parent, a teacher, and a citizen of a dying planet. A line that I really love from one of his poems that I don't think he's reading tonight, is this one. Always is what we tell ourselves in love and landscape, the promise of a clearing's light. I seek you there, held for a moment in the sun, aware that in our paralysis, this is an ending. And I can't wait for you to hear poems from Jared's book. I'll drop the link in the chat. Jared, it's all yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really honored to be here, Donna. Thank you for inviting me. And Tara, wonderful, wonderful poetry. Thank you so much for your reading. So I have a book, Who Will Cradle Your Head? And it's primarily about being a parent during this strange time of the Anthropocene, and knowing that climate is here now. When I was younger, it was a concept that kind of was creeping into the everyday, but now it's here. And so a lot of this is dwelling on that. But as I read this and launch it, I've come to realize I'm also just talking a lot about time. I'm really thinking about the future in order to think about now, in order to think about my kids when they are older. And so a lot of these poems are playing with time in that way. And this is one of them. It's titled "The Exhibits in the Museum of Ice." A swan stretches her neck before looping her bill, a bright shovel, into the snow of her back. The hall is bright, absent of sound. Powder beneath our crampons makes the floor sing. A door cracks open on its hinges, crashes. In another room, a man turns a corkscrew into the ground, hand over hand, head tucked down and away in shame. We walk for hours holding hands through thick mittens, the walls bare, white. We listen for our hearts beating like geese. There are tunnels beneath us. Wind wrinkles the surface, snow serpents like water or a woman waking to the sun's glare. We enter a room rimmed by pots. They fill and empty into the crisp air. We are always moving. We don't know when we began whispering names, syllables escaping our mouths like fog. Spirits we hope would haunt us. A lot of the poems in here, were written during COVID lockdown. I live in Queens, and it was, pretty intense here. And I was with my kids for a long time. So a lot of the poems are dealing directly with things going on with my children during that time. And this one comes directly from a real moment. It's called Animal Crackers. My daughter pulls animals out of the head of a large plastic bear like a magic trick, holds them up and asks, "What's this?" A large cat slopes its shoulders, front paw extended as if to find proper footing between her thumb and forefinger. We begin with names. Snow leopard? Tiger? The plastic bear's smile is wild. "Isn't this nice?" he seems to say, teeth tight with grit and grin. "Isn't this sweet?" But then I remember the palm oil fires in Borneo, a cluster of orangutans pushed in a wheelbarrow, or the handful of bears emerging from the Russian taiga's open maw, fur matted, gummed to a dull brown, come to rummage through the town's leftovers, wraps and rinds fished from metal dumpsters torn open like paper bags, knead pushing us past margins of loss. Giant panda, sea otter. Perhaps the difference between accumulation and loss is a matter of proximity and scale. Animals you can't fit in your palm, two-dimensional as an endangered list. Asian elephant, lowland gorilla. At what point do I stop her? Tell her this is enough, knowing we will not be satisfied, that even our naming, since Adam, is an attempt to live in an unrecognizable world. This next poem is actually inspired by another poem, pretty heavily anthologized. I'm a teacher in high school. I teach poetry all the time. And this is one that I come across a lot, and I love to teach it because it's really great for imagery and inference. It's Abandoned Farmhouse is the original by Ted Kooser. And what it does is it basically just lists things in the abandoned farmhouse, and you, as the reader, are kind of like intuiting, well, what could have happened? Why are these things still here? What does it mean? And Kooser spells a little bit of that out. And I wanted to think about that, but make it not about the people in the farmhouse, but what happens after they've gone. Because for me, one of the fantasies of thinking about the future and climate change is also like, well, what if we're all gone? What if humanity is not here? What is that? And it seems like a perverse comfort, but it's a weird comfort if like, oh, there's no humans, so nature can restore itself. It's a fantasy, but it's somehow works for me. And so this poem kind of fits in that vein. It's called Restoration. It's after Ted Kooser. The rooms were vacant, says the broken glass and tattered curtains in the farmhouse windows. Inviting too, says the broad length of the beds in each drafty room. And a good, well-loved home, say the pellets and peels next to the Bible, torn and broken below the window, brushed by sun. But not for all, say the prints laid in the dirt, leading to the door and the tall grass beyond. Desire is the slope down the back of hills along the horizon, says the glacier sliding like a hand, tracing each boulder-freckled field. Longing is the only measure of time, say the holes tapped into the door's frame by searching birds before a cold winter. Loneliness lays like snowfall or the petals melt, says the spray of mud left at the narrow threshold. Yet something wrong is set right, say the roots that buckle the boards. The fuzz of moss, sugaring pulp and dust, says there is nothing to return to. The cellar filled with dendrites, each splintered side, every pipe spidered with rust, plow broken, the field blossoming seed and understory. Something set right. This one was requested by Donna. It originates from a David Attenborough quote. I have a series of David Attenborough poems. I love Planet Earth. And he talks about one of the problems of the script writing and thinking about these animals that he's talking about is anthropomorphism, and the problem of anthropomorphism. And so this is called the possibility of grief. The problem is being human, desperately seeking proof of life in the lay of an elephant's trunk, the nudge of a mother's foot against her child's cracked hide, lying in drought, flies swirling helixes in the air. What should we make of her refusal to move? Others who keep moving toward the horizon's dull shimmer. An elephant's foot contains muscles capable of interpreting vibrations through the ground. How do we measure the frequencies of our loss? Raised leg, pointed toe, a mother's nudge. Even though you've been gone for 2 years, my mind continues to stumble over your body. The quick pause of surprise, your mother's stubborn refusal to leave your side, lack of sound where your breath should be. When they find bones bleached, they recognize as their own, a herd will stand in a circle together, faces gray, low moans vibrating syllables as sun and shadow, like a rib cage, expand. And walking their way through this whole book is a Sasquatch, which was kind of my way of not talking about myself. And also speculating, well, people don't believe that Sasquatch is real. People don't believe that climate change is real. What if Sasquatch is the only one that survives this thing? What would he see? How would he think? And this is what was weird about it is, as I was writing these poems, they started taking over old poems that I didn't even intend to use in this manuscript. And this is actually one of the first poems I ever published. It had nothing to do with Sasquatch at first, but it made sense once I was writing the book. And it's about a landfill in Staten Island called Fresh Kills. So this is called Sasquatch Explores Fresh Kills. This used to be landfill, now wilding, overgrown, settling layer over composted layer, packing sediment, swaddling root, alive, intimate, suffocating. The ivy's searching hands and bittersweet vines swim the humid air, filled with cicada static. My foot hits an edge, a plastic thud, a doll's mottled face, the remains of an abandoned car seat. Who will cradle your head? What imprint will be left as mustard grass and clover spread like muslin over loss? I trace these green recesses like a scar's braided renewal, shading our grief, which is also hope. A weave, which is memory, but also love. So, Donna, I still have some time, yeah?
Yes, you do.
Okay, so I have a few more that I want to read that are actually very new. I don't know how everybody else feels, but as you read and read and read from a collection, you're like, I want to read other stuff. I want you to hear my other stuff. So this is a poem that I think, if this wasn't published, it would have made it into the manuscript. So this is continuing in the same vein. I wrote it recently. I think, Donna, you may have seen it. It was one of my April Poetry Month poems. It's titled Warnings, and it's based on finding a bright orange cone. I work on the in Long Island City, right on the East River in Queens, and I saw this cone just lying on the side. So this is called Warnings. A bright orange cone lies on its side by the East River, plastic surrounded by rocks and a waterlogged pylon. At low tide, the river gropes kelp-rimmed stones for silt. It takes up to 500 years for plastic to degrade, which is to say, to become smaller pieces of plastic, which is also to say that plastic remains. The remains of this orange cone will lose their luster, fade and bleach while the contours of the river flirt for new boundaries, a plastic touch. For now, the tide pulls at the cone's edges, another warning and a world full of them. I imagine losing myself to the river, pockets lined with invisible plastic. An orange cone signals serious injury, possibly death. Do not travel along the line you intended, it says. White lines tread the cone's plastic surface. Caution, there is another way. Let me know should you find it. Thin trails bald the edges of the park, desire lines, a route carved by initials into the green. A heart's curve, when looked at closely enough, resembles a straight line until you find yourself swerving. Okay, so I'm going to deviate from climate for a little bit. I've been writing a series of poems about returning from the dead and doing mundane, everyday things. And so this is titled Returning from the Dead to Wait at the DMV. Your number is not yours, but an accounting of all who came before you. A man in a cardigan sells reverse mortgages in a muted commercial. Captions appear one letter at a time. A woman squints to see the fine print for organ donation. It's just a loan, the TV writes. I remember driving with you to the hospital, our shadows colliding across the on-ramp. Here, there is the stillness of bodies and cues, like wildfires flowers floating at the road's edge, offering their lavender faces to our centripetal force. You looked back over your shoulder as if to guess the speed of departure. What matters is how you pay it back. I have one more. Tuesday was Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And recently my aunt was terminally ill with cancer, and she was kind of our memory keeper in the family. And I got to talk with her about family that I didn't know. And she had all this paraphernalia and old photographs, and found out we had a whole bunch of family that lived in Ukraine that didn't immigrate with my great grandparents, and all but two of a large photograph had been killed in the Holocaust in the show of bullets where they were killed in ravines. So this is about that, and it's called Diaspora, and it's for Gail. My aunt hands me a photograph at Shiva. 23 people stand in lines. Several boys kneel in front, chests puffed, their heads shaved. The girls are on chairs brought outside for the portrait. They sit in front of a brick wall. No one is looking in the same direction. A girl stares with her fist against her cheek. Another boy daydreams of walking down a road to the forest near the river. There's a space where wind sounds like a secret. In the back, an old man doesn't move behind a graying beard, his eyes stretched to the tree line, searching for the boy. Perhaps these are the two who survived the procession out of town to the ravine and the men with guns. What are their names? She does not know. How many bullets make a minion? The tree she draws for me later is a straight line from Berezdov to New Jersey, roots spreading through layers of soil like a hand that takes hold or one forced to let go. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jared. I love hearing you read from the book, but I'm really excited to hear you read new work as well. We love hearing new work always from everybody. So, wow. We've had quite an evening so far, and you're not going to be disappointed as we continue with our last reader, Michael Garrigan. Michael, who I also met on Twitter, right? See, this is why, hopefully it won't get ruined, because where else am I going to meet all these great writers? And his poems show a deep, deep kinship and connection with the earth, especially our waterways, and the awe and the thinking about your own place in the world that it can inspire. And his book is called River Amen, which I'll drop his bio and that link to this book in the chat. And I'm just going to share the end of a poem. I'm not sure if he's going to read it tonight, but that's why I'm just going to share the end of it so that you can get a little sense of this kind of beautiful kinship that I've talked about. Only in water do we feel hidden currents land creates with its creases. Only in water do we see a stonefly scuttle along the underside of a rock. Only in water do we feel hardpan shift and crumble under our weight. Only in water do woodland bluffs become streamside songs sung sinking into riverbed. Only in water do we discover how our bodies shape this world, how the unseen sows the scene. Michael.
Oh, thank you, Donna. That was beautiful. I might have to read that now, actually. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here tonight, folks. It's truly an honor to be surrounded by such great readers. I'm very humbled. Yeah, so I'll be reading tonight from my new book, River Amen, which is this is actually one of my first official readings for it. It's actually coming out on Tuesday of next week. So I really appreciate you folks having me here and listening to these very new poems. So this book is very much a book of reclamation and of redefinition of rivers as a ceaseless metaphor for many, many things. And in many ways, it's kind of a lot of it is an act of me going back to reclaim and redefine my Catholic faith and my understanding of wilderness and what those things mean to me and what my place is within those things. So I'd like to start with two poems that hopefully capture that, the faith of Reclamation. This first poem is called Communion. Take these let me start again. This is called Communion. Take these wafers of jewel weed and ragweed between fingers. Place them on your tongue. Now say, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, forehead, stomach, shoulders, swallow, Amen. You are now a humid summer day. Veins of thicket creepers spread through you. Your eyebrows are crows, your eyes eagles, your feet, they stay feet, but now leave paw prints of 5 in the mud, river otters. Your knees don't bend, they arch, elderberry. Your lips do not kiss, but stab deadwood, resting on the railroad bed gravel, searching for ants, splintering the afternoon, finding shade. And the second poem I'm going to read is actually one of the last poems of my book. It's called Patron Saint. I fell in love with arrows piercing Saint Sebastian's taut chest, blood-stained tattoos, arms tied tight behind a tree, a reverse hug. At confirmation, it was God who kept Sebastian alive, a bandage of belief. Now, I think it was the skin of a stone pine that saved him, that sealed his wounds, that cradled him into sainthood, a miracle of blood and bark. And for the longest time, that last line, a miracle of blood and bark, was my working title of the book, but then I moved away from it, made it like a subtitle. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time while writing this book, exploring a lot of what I've come to call the post-industrial wilderness areas of Pennsylvania. I live in Pennsylvania, and my family is originally from northeastern Pennsylvania, which is anthracite coal country. So a lot of my family was old miners. You know, I have generations of anthracite coal miners in my family. And so I was naturally pulled to those places in a way to, you know, get closer to my family lineage, but also to look at these places that were used for extreme extraction and have just been left. Most of these, all these companies, almost all of them have been left and gone. And now we have a lot of Rust Belt towns in northeastern PA, Shamokin, Centralia, which is abandoned, Ashland. These are the places of my family. And it's interesting because I think a lot of us, or I know I used to go there as a kid all the time, but I passed over them now. But now that you go back, you see a rewilding occur. And it's kind of a beautiful thing to see these landscapes that were once butchered kind of coming back in their own way. So this poem is for Centralia, PA, which is a town that is still on fire from an abandoned mine back in 1962 that caught on fire. And you go there and there's smoke rising from the ground. And during the pandemic, there used to be this abandoned highway. My father used to take me there as a kid. It was kind of like a little tourist attraction. And it was all full of graffiti. And it was like this eerily beautiful place. It's all cratered and full of all this graffiti. And they covered it with dirt because too many people were going. And I just felt like they should have kept that as a totem to our post-industrial wilderness. So this poem is called Coal Country Paradise. It's for Centralia, PA. The graffiti highway, cratered with smoke potholes, knuckles through a town turned graveyard back in '62. Snow lines ridges. The main street crease stays clear from a constant heat pulse, 120/80, steady. We fade in ash of iron stains and sulfur tattoos falling from subterranean fires, an industrial afterlife of fractured asphalt, bleeding orange mountain veins. A new world will grow from our collapse into a coal country paradise as we slowly compress into a new geological layer. Maybe in a few thousand years, they will find our fossils and conjecture that we lived in the dark, eating styrofoam, breathing coal smoke and drinking water from traffic cones. Our bones bent to our faces as we fell in love with the acidic elixir of silica, benzene, and mercury. Yeah, so I live right along the Susquehanna River, and it shows up a lot in my writing. It's kind of a driving force for for my writing. It's a place I go to every day. I draw a lot of inspiration from it. It's in a lot of ways, it's an endangered river. It's one of the oldest rivers in the world. It's been here long before the Appalachian Mountains. And yeah, I'm always exploring it. So I'm going to read a couple river poems. This is called The River Dark. We walk the tracks in the dark with a 6-pack and lit camel lights as flashlights and bug dope. Chicken livers and sharp hooks jostle and tackle boxes down to the abandoned mill, Bill Meyer, and to the quarry. Its quartz swimming pool blue water held back by rock. We sit on the white cliff calm piles and say we are fishing for catfish, but just smoke a whole pack and get a buzz from cheap beer. Sometimes I think we are still sitting, smoke melding the night to our fingers and lips. Sometimes I think that we went there in a dream that is still living in the sleeping body of our youth. Sometimes I think we fell in love with a dark river, turning our backs to the dawn, keeping its faint orange spread in the corner of our eyes, watching it chase our gods underwater. Yeah. I think the river for me in a lot of ways is the first place of freedom. And I think that's why I am captivated by it. Yeah. And every time I go, something changes, something new arrives. So I'd like to read another river poem. This is called, once I find it, I'm still learning my book. This is called The River, a Ghost. Bones break water, vertebrae tracing sky, no longer womb, but a large eddy that never dries. Its depth and darkness a kindness on summer days, the river giving birth in its slow dissolve into a ghost. Each day hotter than the last disappears another droplet until, slowly, our eyes adjust and we notice its descent. Soon it's all we can tell of the river, what it used to be, what it used to cover. We are left with narrow straps of water flesh, taut ligaments too thin to hide fish, thin enough that a heron only needs to swoop close to break surface, a puncture of proximity that we wish we could fully feel. For if we could, we would bleed out from so many beak stabs, glorious in their precision and sharpness, so sure of themselves. In that river's absence, we are given a new topography, a new horizon to follow as light reaches and recedes. This is what we follow. And this is how I want to end this drought recitation, but this is bullshit. Metaphor only goes so far. I'm sorry for turning another river into another metaphor, for hiding grief when I know full well that to hide is to bury, for trying to compare a river in drought to a couple unable to have a child. It is never memory, just haunting in the periphery, a shadow we can never quite trace back to its solid form. Can something alive, never alive, become a ghost? We once believed in subterranean streams seeping, reclaiming rivers, a conjuring of hope into life. In the slow fade, rock is all we touch. We are left with river bones. And this is also bullshit. Here. We are left with desire for rain. We are left with sunlight and moonlight and nights so dark, all we are is thigh against thigh. All we hear is the slow murmur of water kissing rock. All we trace is the intertwining of our ligaments, liturgies of love, a topography so thin and so taut, we can't help but break our ghosts into pieces with our thirst. Yeah, that was the river, a ghost. That was my first time reading that in public, so yeah. All right. I'd like to read a poem kind of from Montana. So I spent 2 weeks as the artist in residence for the Bob Marshall Wilderness Area back in 2021, which meant I got to stay in this backcountry off the grid cabin about 10 miles out into the backcountry. No cell service, no running water, no electricity, just me, some grizzlies, and a bunch of mice and a river. And I got to hike every day and write and fish a lot. And I would sit on this ledge overlooking the middle fork of the Flathead River every night and just watch everything and, write poems. And it was a really, really incredible experience. I'm still processing. I think the hardest thing was just being completely alone for 2 weeks and not being able to talk to anybody. But it was, like I said, a life-changing experience. And this is a poem that I started before I went there, and then I was able to finish it once I was there, if that makes any sense. I've grown to love ledges, like literal ledges, those like places, on the precipices, those are the places, like you get to those thin places, and this is what I would consider a ledge poem. It's also my version of a haibun, loosely. It's quite long, so bear with me. It's called The Poet Sits on a Ledge and Writes a Letter. Dear reader, up on Tussey Mountain, I sit on rock ledges and watch windmills across the valley spin wind that reaches me shortly. I am here to tell you about the valley floor and forests turning color and fields being cut for last harvest and 2 bald eagles that sweep so close to me I can see feathers pulse, and how I can't get the news up here, but I know the world is turning by distant trains and the hum of traffic on Route 45, and how the sun is about to pull the moon into its rightful place low in the sky right next to Mars. I am here to tell you, dear reader, that the river never stops flowing, even when in drought, and it's merely a trickle. The rocks move light into shadows, eddies of darkness and riffles of moss murmur low love songs. There is always a river. I am here to tell you about the God I met along this ridge of the Allegheny front. It caught me listening for crickets in winter. And this God ate the peanut M&Ms out of the trail mix, ignoring the raisins. And this God sat with me and we said nothing, and the clouds covered the forest and everything began to float. And I swear the air tasted like chicken pot pie and potato rolls, and we were full, and in that fullness we napped. I dreamt that we knew each other, you and I, and in that knowing, words became bitter and thoughts became leaves crunching under the hooves of a buck, scaling the steep ridge on opening day of archery season, not seeing us. You and I, dear reader, sitting on this ledge above him, and in that unknowing, another God was formed. A question that spreads like a wool blanket over us so thickly we cannot fully wake. And so we dream, you and I and that God and that buck. We dream because if we stop, the river will still keep running and the rain will still come, and we will miss rock turn shadows into light, and we will miss moss riffles thicken with water. We will miss the mud. We will miss the eagles. I woke from that nap so quickly I felt the world start. I am here to tell you, dear reader, that all the gods I ever met have been on the edges of this world, on ledges and ridges, on thin fir needles, on foam lines of water against bank, in that granular heaven where rock and dirt meet to create land, where hands meet thighs to create touch, where light meets seed to create life. Dear reader, please know, every edge is an altar in this world of ours. Thanks, Donna. That was for you. I think I have time for one more. All right, cool. This will be my last poem then. All right. So in a lot of ways, like I said earlier, this book is a lot of me trying to like reclaim the faith that I was kind of raised in, which was the Catholic faith. And a lot of it, so I took a lot of the moments of mass and kind of reimagined them in some ways. And one of those ways was I wrote liturgies, or my version of a liturgy. And so this liturgy comes from me spending a summer trying to catch a carp on the Susquehanna River, which these are really big fish, and I can never catch them. They're really hard to catch, at least for me. And anyway, I never caught one, but I wrote this poem, and it's called Liturgy of Carp Becoming a God. Find an island thick with knotweed and 2 white egrets stalking shallows. Wade downstream along the bank, pausing every few feet to let the river show you how to be, to make sure that the rocks and ledges you see are what they are and not what you want them to be. Climb over the trunk of a lightning-struck river birch, look into water, and you are still. Let your eyes adjust. Find a school of 7 large carp brushing their scales against sunken branches. Breathe until you begin to blend. Slowly kneel until knees hit soft sediment that's soaked for most of the year, but it's August and the river is thirsty. And these carp, they are shuffling like stalks of corn in morning wind. And everything moves as if we're caught in a hidden riverland hymn. And you are still. Follow their rhythms until you notice they are taking turns swimming into the deep channel to suck down little damselfly nymphs, letting water usher them into the shallow end of the pool where they feel it slow and scoot quick up under the deadfall, waiting their turn, and your fingers are in the water, reaching for their tails, hoping to touch one since you can't seem to land one with your fly rod. And now your palm is wet, and you brush off the memory of a wafer turned into body, amen, and a long walk back to your pew. As the next carp takes its turn, you slide your whole arm in and let it become water, and you are still and haven't breathed in a few seconds. And you think you finally found the right words to build a prayer that will be heard. And when you exhale, they notice you, because that's what gods do, notice. And they dart off into the deep current, and your palms are left open. And once sediment settles, you consider sliding your whole body into water to become a river prayer flag forever caught in current. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and listening to my poems. I appreciate it.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I'm so happy you read that poem. I did. That was one of those moments. So I first read that poem. I got to that last page and I was like, damn it, this is so good. And I was like, when I whipped the book across the room, like I want to write something like that. If you would like to, in just a second, unmute, I'm going to drop all 3 book links back into the chat. That first one is Michael's, then Jared's, and Tara's. It is National Poetry Month. A great way to support poetry is to buy the books of the people who are writing it. So I certainly hope you will do that. Thank you so much for being here. I know we're kind of a small audience tonight, but I appreciate it. I know the weather is kind of nasty here in Chicago and other places. So we're really happy that you were here. The recording of this will be up probably later this evening, so you can share it with others who weren't here. And you can join us in May, 3rd Thursday in May, for Courtney LeBlanc, and then 2 prose writers in May, Yael Aldana and Nancy Stolman. So I am going to stop the recording. Thank you so much for coming, and feel free to hang out if you have a question or you want to just say hello. Thank you so much to all 3 of our readers. There was a beautiful affinity between the work that you read tonight, and it was really lovely to hear. Thanks everyone for coming, and hopefully we will see you again for